If you ever needed a reminder of why you should hate the world government in One Piece, just look to chapter 1095. Because while we've seen and heard about many of the atrocities that those celestial dragons have committed over the past 800 years, what we see in this chapter might be the most heartbreaking. As we finally get to see into the backstory of one Kuma, as we finally get to see Kuma's backstory. Starting from him being born as a very, very, very large baby. Honestly, it's a miracle that someone as small as his mother was able to push out a baby that size and still be fine afterwards. But then again, when you look at Kuma's dad compared to her, well, you get where I'm going with this. Then we continue his backstory all the way up to that failed escape attempt we saw earlier in Egghead when Bonney first dove into his memories. So we're basically just continuing on from that scene. And in this long-awaited flashback, we find out that Kuma and his dad are descendants of the Buccaneer people who were hiding out in Sorbet Kingdom, the very same kingdom he'd go on to rule much later in life. And you know, it's actually kind of ironic if you think about it. He went from being in a family that were trying their best to hide amongst the common folks and, stay under the radar, to basically being the person in the most spotlight in that kingdom much later on. Now, it's worth pointing out that as far as I can tell from my research, this is our very first time hearing this name. But given that Daddy Longlegs himself claims them to be criminals, we can assume that they were a race or a clan that existed during the Void Century that sided against Emu and the other kingdoms that went on to form the world government. And as a result of the war, were thought to be completely wiped out, but at least one member survived who went on to have a kid, who also went on to have a kid, and so on until we eventually got to Kuma. And I'm stopping the bloodline at Kuma because I'm still not entirely sure if Bonney is his biological daughter or just his adopted one. But something or someone we actually end up meeting at the end of the chapter might finally give us the answer to that. Anyway, getting back into the flashback, and man, this was kind of hard to read. I mean, first they were sold into slavery, then Kuma basically had to grow up as a slave of a celestial dragon, where we can tell from this flashback that every day was basically just beating after beating, because throughout the entire thing, we constantly saw him and his dad covered in wounds that seemingly were never healing. And for his dad, those wounds would never end up healing, because partway through the flashback, shortly after losing his mom, Kuma's dad is shot in the head for simply being a bit too loud. By the way, this happened right in front of little Kuma while the two of them were mid-conversation. So yeah, just packing on the trauma there. The longer this flashback went on, the more my heart began to ache for Kuma even more than it already did. Because this poor guy, he was basically born into slavery, lost both his parents at a very young age, one of which was killed right in front of him, finally escaped eventually, went on to become king of the country that basically sold him out in the first place, became a loving father, and then ultimately turned all that down to become a cyborg, lose his free will, and just end up as a slave again. His life is basically just one tragedy after another, but hey, seemingly there were some small rays of light in that cloud-filled life of his. Because as we get to the end of the chapter, we get to see Kuma's first meeting with Ivankov and his apparent little sister Jenny, who, again, as far as I can tell, is a brand new character. And the very first thing we see this brand new character do is stuffing her face. So yeah, obviously, because of this, the fans immediately jump to the idea that Jenny must be Bonney's mother. So much so that I've already seen at least 10 different colored versions of this page, all of her sporting Bonney's signature pink hair. And look, the two of them being gluttons isn't definitive proof that they're related, but they most likely are. And given the fact that one of the first pictures Oda drew of child Bonney was her in tattered clothing similar to what slaves wear, you can start to kind of connect the dots between the three characters. More than likely, this first meeting between Jenny and Kuma was the start of their love story, a love story that unfortunately must end in tragedy because current One Piece takes place 38 years after they met, and we've never heard of Ivankov having a sister, let alone Bonney's mother. So I'm guessing if she is in fact her mom, a few years after Bonney is born, Jenny tragically dies due to more than likely something a celestial dragon did to her, which spurs Ivankov and Kuma on to escape and eventually end up joining up with Monkey D. Dragon. And, well, you know the rest from here. Or actually, we don't know, because there's still a huge chunk of Kuma's past that we don't really know anything about. But I'm guessing we'll get to see exactly what happened in those missing years over the next few chapters. Which is good. Very good. Because the more time we devote to this flashback, the more time Oda has to figure out exactly how he's going to get Bonney out of his current situation. Because we left her just moments away from suffering a similar fate as her grandpa times 100. And neither Sanji, Frankie, or Stella is able to do anything to help her out in this situation, as good old Saint Saturn has some mysterious power that keeps the three of them locked in place. And when I first read this part of the chapter, I originally thought that this was just Conqueror's Haki that's actually strong enough to affect Sanji. Which, given that this is a member of the Gorosei, basically the endgame bosses of the One Piece series, I kind of started to believe that. But then Stella does mention that this might actually be a part of Saturn's Devil Fruit power, which, if that's the case, is actually a better option for the good guys than the former. Because as we know, strong enough haki can actually override devil fruit powers, which means all we would need is for Luffy to get back up and pop out his Conqueror's haki and they can negate the effects of this power. That is, if he can even get back up, because I mean, he did use Gear 5 twice in one day, which is the max we've ever seen him be able to use it, and one of those times was to fight an Admiral, who he only managed to at most tie with. Personally, I'm not giving Luffy to win in that fight. So yeah, he might be down for the count, and the only other confirmed Straw Hat with Conqueror's haki is stuck miles away fighting against a Catman, so he won't be much help either. So as of right now, I really only see two possible ways for Bonney to get out of this. Either the sight of seeing a young, beautiful lady seconds away from dying is enough to force Sanji to unlock his Conqueror's haki, which honestly is kind of believable, or the much more likely option, Kuma comes to her rescue, appearing just in time to rescue her from certain death. I don't know, I just feel like that's what Oda's been slowly leading towards with this whole Kuma subplot, that he's on his way to Egghead either to reunite with Bonney or to protect Vegapunk, because he didn't start moving and heading towards wherever he's heading, which again is more than likely Egghead, until Bonney was on the island and a kill order was placed on Vegapunk. So one of those two things, if not both of them, has to be the trigger to whatever programming is forcing Kuma to do this. But I'm sure either option is fine with fans as long as it results with Bonney being rescued. Because given everything that's happened these past few chapters, Bonney's stocks has shot up through the roof. And despite what I said in my previous video, the odds of her joining the Straw Hats is becoming more and more likely. At the very least, I can definitely see post-Egghead her forming an alliance with Luffy similar to the one he had with Law in order to take down the world government. Which, normally I'd argue Luffy wouldn't take up, he'd turn it down, simply because while the world government are technically their enemies, the Straw Hats don't really go out of their way to fight them that often. And when they do, the Navy is usually the aggressor in those situations, either kidnapping a member of the crew or just randomly attacking them while the Straw Hats are busy with another wacky adventure. But with it looking more and more likely with each passing chapter that Stella won't be making it off Egghead, and Luffy more than likely already seeing the old man as a friend, that could be more than enough reason for him to decide to go to war with the Gorosei. So, given that line of logic, the alliance between these two members of the Worst Generation is more than likely happening post-Egghead, and since Bonney no longer has a ship or a crew, she might as well become a full-time member of the crew of the future Pirate King.